Good evening, everybody. It's really good to see you. My name is David Plylar. I'm one of the concert producers at the Library of Congress in the music division. And I'm really excited about tonight's program because I was thinking we're gonna have to wait till the sesquicentennial of Ligeti to actually get to do the Ligeti Centennial project here. But we're finally, the stars aligned and we're able to do this. So I'm joined tonight by Wulliman with the Takt Trio, and Marcos Balter, who was commissioned by the Verna and Irving Foundation at the Library of Congress, Endowment at the Library of Congress, excuse me, and for a new piece for horn trio tonight. And so this is, I don't know how many of you are really familiar with the horn trio repertoire, but kind of one of the foundational ones is the Brahms trio that was written in 1865. There weren't a ton, I think, that were written before that, even though I'm sure there's somebody out there who was saying, I was before Brahms, but not getting the credit or whatever. But in any case, we've got a program that's going to include, tomorrow we're going to hear the Brahms, but tonight we're going to hear Marcos's piece, a piece by Hilda Paredes, who almost was able to come out, but unfortunately wasn't able to work out. A piece by her that was commissioned by the Koussevitzky Music Foundation, and then also the Ligeti Horn Trio, which is kind of one of the foundational 20th century great pieces that, so I'm extremely excited. I'm like busting over here with how much I really love this music. So welcome, and I'm looking forward just to kind of chat about the music you're gonna be playing and whatnot. So welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure. It's an honor to be put in a program with Ligeti, who is one of my personal heroes. But it's also, I'm doomed to look bad. So, you forget. I mean, it's a little bit better than the usual because Balter, people love to do like the Bach, Beethoven, Brahms. Balter, I'm like, no, I'll always lose. So, so this one, I've stayed away from any kind of homage or comparison as much as I could because I knew that it wasn't going to be a good look for me, but I'm glad to be here.
Well, I got to hear a little bit of your piece, but I haven't heard the whole thing, and I'm really excited by what I've heard. And maybe you could just say a bit about the piece is called Atlas, and maybe you could say a bit about what prompted you to write this music this way. Yeah,
I mean, I love Brahms, and I love Ligeti, and I love their horn trios. Those are my two favorite horn trios. But I knew it was going to be a challenge because it's a tricky instrumentation for many, many reasons. And it's a piece that I started. I have about like 6 or 7 different horn trios that never came to exist. And I kept abandoning ideas until I got to this one and I felt good about it and pursued it. A little too late, but I did. Austin is amazing and very accommodating. But what I tried to do was to do a piece that was not an homage by being an homage. So the idea of Atlas is this sort of groups of islands, almost like archipels, that you only start to realize that they are objects that have this affinity to one another as the piece unfolds. And as the piece unfolds, that degree of affinity also gets to be manipulated by the musicians because the piece is primarily fully written, but there is a lot of improvisation that happens through the piece at different times with different improvisatory windows. It's kind of a juggling exercise in many ways for musicians because they have to keep track of where they are and also allow themselves a degree of freedom to play with the material. So that's the idea of Atlas, sort of like remapping things. And the hidden quasi-homage too is that the mountain formation Atlas is the formation that kind of divides Africa from Europe. So I kind of wanted to, do a little hat tip to Ligeti's interest in sub-Saharan music and also this idea of Eurocentric music that is fully written and precise, and the tradition of the African diaspora of improvisation and freedom with fixed material.
That's wonderful. Austin, maybe can you say a bit about what that's like to put that together? Like how, I mean, it sounds really good, like in concept, but how does it come together?
Yeah, it's a really wonderful challenge to put together, actually, because what it does is it draws on our ability as a trio to do these complex webs of rhythmic material. There's these really beautiful kind of hocketing stuff happening between us. And before Marcos came to rehearse with us, we were very focused on the precision of how that was coming together rhythmically and getting everything to really sound like clocks, which comes to mind for me with Ligeti. And I feel that in the piece still, but now it's as if after working on it together, we realized more of this archipelago feeling. Maybe clouds are also a part of this clock. The clock is behind a cloud. And so we get to explore gesture as well as the rhythmic nature of it. So as we found that kind of shaping and the world that it lives in, which is a little more ineffable, a little less hammer precision, I think also that led us to where starting to be able to improvise over it made more sense, because it's like there is a web of this gestural material that then we can kind of emerge from as soloists. And so parts of it will be repeated, and then one of us will diverge, or two of us will diverge, but one will stay the same. And so, you come up with different systems of how to do different parts of the piece. Each part has its own kind of dynamic between a soloist and somebody who's fixed on the score. And for me, as a musician, the way I'm trained, mostly from the very Eurocentric background, it's a great way for me to enter something that's fixed, that I've been able to sink my teeth into as a score, but then beyond that, I can start to let my imagination take a little more flight with some guidance from Marcos as far as what materials are making sense when we rehearsed it.
That's wonderful. I mean, I feel badly going into this next topic that's related to this, but without David here to speak to the part of the horn. But what makes a horn trio in particular, I think, a difficult situation is that you have to. It's usually difficult to balance a single brass instrument with strings and piano. And I'm just wondering how you both kind of have dealt. We were talking. Austin and I were talking earlier about. The dynamics mean a different thing when you're in a different context, and maybe you could speak to that a bit.
Yeah, well, just from a performer standpoint, I normally play in a string quartet, so a lot of my life is spent like really honing these textures that are unified, super homogeneous, and our sense of what the bottom and top is of our range is very co-decided over many years, and because of that, it starts to push further and further because you got to stay interested over hundreds of concerts. And so my sense of what pianissimo meant in a score or what mezzo forte meant has changed in a lovely way because of working with Connor and David. This is a little bit of a side project for all of us, and coming together and playing with strings that are so long on the piano. And not that the quartet never plays with piano, but not as much. And thinking about the resonance of the horn, the different kind of resonance that comes from it, has been eye-opening for me personally. But then, in addition to that, you might think, well, the horn's loud, but also David's incredible and can play very soft. So there's some malleability there as far as the sound.
Marcos, what's it like to write for such performers, especially with that aspect?
Well, I mean, my practice really is centered at working with people that I know really well as much as I can. Sometimes I work with, musicians that I'm just getting to know, but most of the time, I seek out, projects that involve friends. Austin and I have known each other now. It's sad, right?
20 years?
20,
yeah,
perhaps,
we've been working together for 20 years.
We went to school together.
Yeah.
And David, I've known David since the formation of the International Contemporary Ensemble, which was 22 years ago. Connor is the youngest kid, and this is our third project together, and I've known Connor now for almost a decade. No, a little less, perhaps. And there is a beauty of not writing for instruments, but writing for people, understanding who they are behind their instruments and what they do well, what is peculiar about their sounds, and really being able to hone a piece based on who they are, which rather than limiting, having to create something that is like bespoke to someone, to me at least, it frees me to visualize colors and sounds in very specific ways because I know the folks, so I don't have to imagine that much. I can just close my eyes and hear Austin's playing and know what kind of part would sound good for Austin, which is any part.
Well, but it's a two-way street, I think, too. For me, when I pick up the score, then it's just a much shorter journey from the seeing to the knowing what the sound quality is. There's still a journey there, and we took working together to find the sound, but especially with some of the more virtuosic passages in this, I could basically just sit down and play them, as opposed to like composers I've never worked with before, especially if I'm not familiar with a lot of their pieces. It takes me a while sitting with the notes, kind of like playing them a lot, getting to know the harmony and like getting in there. It's just such a different thing when you know each other. Yeah.
Well, speaking of that, how did this group come to be about, the Takt Trio? I had this image in my mind that it was just that you met in a bar, talked.
We've all met different places over time. I actually don't know where we all met for the first time. It's one of those things, we've been around each other's kind of ambitus for a long time. And
Chicago, probably, right?
I'm sure I met Bird in Chicago at some point at an ice show. But Connor, I think I didn't meet until I moved to New York in 2016. But Connor and I have been talking about violin piano stuff for a while, but then with the Ligeti centenary coming up, this was 2 years ago now, I guess, 2.5. Yeah, I don't know, what's time? I brought up to him that I really wanted to be playing the horn trio in that year, and commissioned some pieces to go with it to keep the tradition going. To me, it's just such an important piece in my life. I've been playing it since I was a student. It's so meaningful and so deep. Both the Brahms and the Ligeti are pieces about family to me, and about really about life, not just about music, which I also love, but those pieces just resonate with me in such a deep way that I just really felt this need to do it and keep building that repertoire. Connor and I talked about whether we could do that, and of course the first person that came to mind for us was Bird, because he's phenomenal and we both know him and love him. So yeah, that's basically how it started. And then we were like, well, let's make it happen.
That's wonderful. I mean, that was kind of how I knew all these musicians individually, but figured that the concoction would be something that's worth seeing for sure and hearing. Maybe could you say a bit about Hilda's piece? Because she wasn't able to be here tonight, but I'm curious because I haven't heard any of it yet. She's always got a lot to say, so I'm very curious.
Yeah, I won't try to speak for her because she's very eloquent and has a lot to say about her music. But I will say what I feel about the piece, which is that it's quite a statement, a very poetic piece. It's called Koan, and you, I think, will feel that kind of like succinct poetic nature of it, even though it's kind of a long piece. It might feel contradictory, but somehow the material is very focused, and what it's trying to say is very focused. But it also draws on an incredible number of instrumental techniques to say it. It's very vivid, it's very coloristic. It has both sections of incredible introspection and wild virtuosity. Honestly, stuff where when I first got it, I was like, "Hoo boy, are we gonna be able to do this?" And it took a couple shows to get it there, but I love that journey. I love being pushed. In certain ways, for the violin, there's these passages of very fast pizzicati. For the piano, there's incredible leaping gestures of chords, and the horn has a beautiful reference to the Brahms that's kind of set against this modernist accompaniment with a reference to the Brahms. If you catch it, I'm proud of you. But you still hear the melody, maybe it takes a couple times to hear the piece to catch it. It's beautifully hidden in there. The reason I immediately thought of commissioning Hilda when we were thinking of composers to commission for this project is because of the way that I feel like her innate style speaks to Ligeti, and the way that rhythmic layers can become texture and atmosphere in her music, the way that things are drawn out of instrumental sound and into an effable, rhythmic, melodic domain. There's certain techniques that I think you'll have seen before, but the way that they're drawn into something melodic and harmonic in this music is very special.
That's wonderful. I'm looking forward to that. I'm thinking about some of the connections. I mean, Ligeti had some things to say where he felt that his piece was more about Beethoven than it was about Brahms, but I think that maybe he was pushing that a bit hard, because there's a lot of, there are certain similarities, of course, that are there between those pieces, but one of them that kind of comes up, just to bring it up just as something we could talk about briefly, is there's an element of something unstable with this music where most of the material is on the offbeat. And it takes a long time for it to stabilize. And even then when it does, the tempo is just, there's something odd about it that makes it just so that it has this tension there that is really kind of different for Brahms. And I think that maybe some people were critical of this, but I find it fascinating. And I find that same sort of tension in the Ligeti with the way that he deals with things that line up or don't, and purposefully manipulates those in different ways. But I'm just kind of wondering if as you're playing these pieces or listening to these pieces, do they have, you mentioned that you've done the Ligeti since you were younger. Does it have this feeling of a naturalness, or does it still kind of keep that edge to it?
That's a really interesting question. To me, I guess I would frame it more as like that both of those pieces are about emotions that are hard to hold. And so some of that stuff that's a little bit more ineffable or a little less put into the four square kind of feelings that we're used to me is about how once you look really close at something that's very close to your heart, you can kind of come undone. And so like the opening of the Brahms, for instance, he has, I feel like there's a seeking, a searching for like, how can I say something about my mother? That's just like what I hear in that piece is like really, his very close relationship with his mother and the desire to say something in the time after her passing. And to me, death and disintegration of things also looms very large in Ligeti's piece, the way that things come undone in various ways, that he unravels threads that seem like they're going to be very clear and then come spin apart very quickly, but that also happens emotionally. I think in the first movement it's a little bit more wistful or nostalgic, but by the end I think everything's kind of, death is staring us in the face.
Devastating, almost.
Yeah, it's very devastating, yeah.
No, that's. I feel very similarly with respect to all these things that you're mentioning. I wonder, Marcos, if you could tell us a little bit more about any other aspects of these kind of pivotal trios from the past, whether there's other certain ways that those resonated with your own work with the...
I mean, those are two composers that I absolutely adore. In terms of 20th century composers, I would put Ligeti as my biggest influence. I've been a Ligeti fan since I was a kid, and I grew up on Brahms. My instrument is piano, so I grew up playing 117, 118, and all those things. A lot of Brahms chamber music as an accompanist with singers, playing Brahms, chamber music in general. The piano trios are fun, very difficult. I don't play that anymore. And Ligeti, has been sort of my standard in many ways for composers that think creatively yet very structurally. And rhythm, the attention of both to rhythm is something that has always captivated me. I mean, Brahms is like the king of hemiola, right? That you can listen to something and be like, is this in 3 or is this in 4? And Ligeti is like, well, this is in 3 and 4 and 5 and 7 at the same time, So there's this idea of layers and perhaps not confusion, but, sort of liminalism, kind of living in between the states, that you can choose where to follow, that adventure at any given time. And then there are portals that you can feel things in different ways. Brahms is also the king of
Dangerous. The
inner
portals
voice.
are dangerous. You
Very
have to avoid the
dangerous.
portals.
The dark portals, yes. But there's this idea of inner voices that are not just fillers, but are fully independent. There's counterpoint that is really important for all of them. So I see a lot of similarities, even though Ligeti liked to diss on Brahms here and there. I can see how Ligeti also grew up on Brahms.
Yeah.
And I grew up on both of them very proudly.
My brain went dead a moment ago. It was because I was thinking about this one aspect of Ligeti that you brought up, and that's that there's all these elements that are always, there's a purpose to them, a purpose to the lines. I think that another thing about it is that this particular piece is situated at a time in Ligeti's life when it is a kind of a meeting place for the past with elements from his past as early as 1953 and before, and then it explodes outward into especially in the early 90s with pieces like the violin concerto, the viola sonata, other pieces like that where the same type of material or a variation on a micropolyphonic idea becomes it's a piece that is already beyond itself. And he knew it. It feels like he knew it. I don't speak for Ligeti, but it just sounds like it feels like he knew it, and then he was willing to go with it and allow himself to keep exploring that. And I think that was a good thing for him at that point to allow himself that freedom.
Absolutely, and how Ligeti's harmonic language also changed quite a lot at that period. That he had approached microtonality in other pieces before, but as a gestural element. And when you get to that specific phase, and a little bit later on, microtonality becomes structural. Really thinking in terms of tonal dependency within something outside of the chromatic scale, for which both the violin and the horn are amazing instruments to explore, because they have microtonality innate to them. It's built within them. So it's a great formation to explore microtonality, which I've used in my work quite a lot, as you hear. But that particular period of Ligeti, that's what I think, that sort of stands out the most for me. It's really the structural approach to rhythm as it relates to microtonality.
Well, thank you for that.
Yeah, I would just add to that I think you'll be able to hear it really clearly in the concert. The way pitch is more of an issue for this in Marcos and Ligeti's pieces, not so much in Brahms, is traditionally harmonic, obviously, but the way that our foundational perception of what a note is being brought to bear in those pieces, I think is really critical for perceiving them with the maximal kind of effect that they have, which is, I think, can give us a kind of new vision of what the piano is doing in that context.
One other thing I should just mention, because David isn't here, is that one of the fascinating correspondences between these pieces, and perhaps between Marcos's and Hilda's too, I'm not sure, is the fact that that Brahms had written for the natural horn, and so he had, in particular, E-flat horn, and Ligeti in his, he has basically he has brackets over sections where he wants the horn player to basically pretend like it's a natural horn in that key, and so he labels what that key is, and it gives you a period where it's emulating that in that sort of way. And it just occurs to me that is exactly what they're doing, and playing with that, and it's a very different thing to hear the Brahms done on a natural horn versus a valved horn. But I think we're going to hear the valved horn.
Yeah, you heard the valved horn. Actually, this is really making me realize something that I kind of wasn't thinking about super clearly. It was like a sort of innate choice that I made, or instinctual choice that I made because of the way Hilda's piece is, and because of the way your piece is with the natural harmonics and quarter tones as well. And the Ligeti, in the Ligeti, there's a lot of harmonics in the violin that are written as the finger false harmonics. that seem to correspond with notes of the overtone series that just in that era, when he wrote that piece, not many people were playing those harmonics, natural harmonics, and probably players were like, no, dude, we don't do that. I've started doing a lot of those as natural harmonics, and I think it sounds really cool with the textures that Ligeti wrote. So that's something that I think because of Hilda's piece, you'll hear really heavily utilizes harmonics up to the 12th partial in the violin part. And the horn is always playing super high partials. So I think you'll hear really interesting intonations that come out from that. And a little different in the Ligeti maybe than you've heard before if you're familiar with the piece.
Yeah. Well, I want to make sure that there's time for people to ask questions if they want to. But before we do that, maybe you could just tell us what you're up to right now. Like, what's the next thing for? Is the horn trio gonna kind of continue on, or is it gonna reconstitute at some point? Marcos, what's your next piece you're working on, or next concert?
Right now, I am working on an orchestral piece for the São Paulo Symphony Orchestra. It's my first piece for them, so I'm very excited. I consider them not only one of the best orchestras in my country, but one of the best orchestras in general nowadays playing new music. And then after that, I am doing this big project with Connor, and Jay Campbell, who plays at Austin's quartet, and 4 electronic musicians. It's going to be Sinem Perler, Iko Imori, Gladstone Butler, and and Maria Chavez. And it's a piece for piano, cello, and 4 electronic improvisers. That it's going to be a evening length piece that we're going to premiere at the end of the year in New York.
Exciting! Wow.
And that includes the parts of that violin, the cello and piano piece that I've heard before.
Exactly. So it's
beautiful music, really, really beautiful.
It's a partnership with
music.
the 92Y that we've been developing that for a while. Yeah.
And Austin?
Yeah, well, for the trio, I think the next thing for us is to work towards a recording of this new stuff that we have together. Yeah, and I think there will be a little break from concerts. We just had a nice little burst of activity here. But yeah, for me, it's back to the string quartet. A lot of touring with Jack this summer, X Festival, Spoleto Festival, working with one of our idols and close collaborators, George Lewis, in Ticino this summer, and working towards a recording of our bigger project that we're calling Modern Medieval, where we've both commissioned and myself and Chris of the quartet have made kind of adaptations and reimaginings of medieval music along with contemporary music. So that's what's next.
Awesome. Any questions? We have a microphone that is ready for you. If you have. Here we go.
Hey, Marcos. Quick question. I have, so I was, as you know, I was here recently in DC just about a few weeks ago for another premiere of your own. And I'm wondering if you could talk, so in that piece, which was performed by the Shanghai String Quartet and
Anthony Roy Constanzo.
Thank you. That was a very introspective piece for yourself that dealt a lot with, was in relation to an artwork, but for you, it had a lot to do with the pandemic and how that affected you as a composer. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about this piece in comparison to that, where you are in time with how you compose this work. Sorry, I don't know if anyone here was here for that one as well, but so maybe this is a little bit of a personal question.
So, I mean, they're very different, I should say. The piece that Zach is referring to it's a half hour piece for countertenor and string quartet with text by Gertrude Stein. I got like selections from Tender Buttons, and it's all about being in a room and acknowledging a room. And it's very, very small in many ways, in its sort of structural scope, very intimate, slow in general. And I came out of the pandemic wanting to be as anti-pandemic as I possibly could. So I'm on a kick now of many, many notes and very fast music. And
Cool.
so the
I love that.
energy-
You know I love that. You know I love that.
So the energy is completely different. The energy itself is completely different. I've been really sort of wanting to address the idea of rhythm, microtonality in rhythm in my music for a very long time, because I do think that one of the least really looked on parameters in contemporary music these days, to me, has been rhythm and rhythmic complexity in different ways. So I'm very focused on that. So this piece is a bucket of very cold water, thrown at the musicians, and hopefully a fun journey.
Another one up here. Just one moment, just.
There are some slow moments there too, though.
Okay, so since, I'm going to follow up on that because that's exactly where I was thinking with the discussion about the Ligeti rhythms, and we were talking before. I don't know whether you were at the opening of the Whitney where they had this Nancaro Fest,
I was there.
and
I was there with the player piano.
I was sitting behind the player piano with my back to the soundboard, and because Ligeti was all through that, and I sat through the whole concert with my back to the soundboard all of those days, just feeling those vibes. So I'm just really excited to hear you talk about rhythms being kind of interwoven. And the question is, from your compositional perspective and the players that you're composing for, because at the time he was doing player piano because he thought human beings can't do those polyrhythms. And now different groups are, using click tracks or whatever to start doing the polyrhythms. And I'm just curious how you're exploring that with the musicians that you're composing for, without resorting to those electronics.
Absolutely. I love Nancaro. I love Colin Nancaro. And for those of you who are more unfamiliar with Nancaro's music, he left the U.S. because he didn't want to go to the war. And he fled to Mexico, and he had no access to performers. So he started punching cards in a player piano. And when he started doing that, he freed himself also from the responsibility of quote unquote doing playable music rhythmically speaking, and was a huge influence on Ligeti, by the way. Ligeti loved Nancaro's music. But nowadays we have amazing people that can actually do transcriptions of Nancaro's music and play it beautifully, including a fantastic pianist composer that both of us have a very close relationship with, Amy Williams, who was my composition teacher at Northwestern and who has composed for Jack Quartet. They just did an amazing concert of Amy's music, and I think that Amy's music is full of that, right? It's
Yeah, I feel like it's one of the big, just kind of current things for performers to be able to explore this, and to learn how to embody these things. Rhythmic pedagogy really fell out of the conservatories. I don't know when that happened, because if you look back at, British texts that they would have taught to the choir boys of England back in the day, they were learning tuplets up past what I can do comfortably right now. So it's really a lost art. And something that I think is really important, because the more that we're able to embody different times, I think we're able to say more things in the music. I think we're able to see different counterpoints of ideas that have a very different lens. So yeah, I think it's a huge point of interest and a critical problem in musical education that needs to be addressed. The people who are mostly focused on it now have taught ourselves, because there's really no education of it. Not none, but almost nowhere is rhythm taught. Even in a basic sense, you can run into amazing performers who don't even really understand the way a triplet functions. They just know by ear the way that goes. So when that's the mode of teaching, is by listening and relating, which is so important. You have to be able to hear it and hear style. But if there's not a relationship with pure kind of ratios or abstract relationships between things as a way of being able to engage with musical idea, then I think there's a big limitation to how we're able to explore new style.
Plus, I think that in talking about education, I mean, I'm also an educator, very passionate about how music is taught in general. We have other cultures that have a hugely complex way of approaching, pedagogically speaking, rhythm. So South Indian music with the Takadimi system that kids can do 7 against 13 without even blinking, you know, and things that actually have been removed from the European style of studying music also are interesting to notice. For instance, improvisation. Improvisation was essential to every single performer and composer until the end of the 19th century. When you have a Beethoven concerto and there is a cadenza, the soloist was expected to improvise. You know, so you couldn't really think of training yourself as a musician without delving really seriously into improvisation. It was not until the 20th century that improvisation started to disappear from music for a variety of reasons that have nothing to do with sound and music, but with different things. And now I'm very glad to see that we are much more aware of world cultures that have these pluses that perhaps Western music doesn't quite have or hasn't quite pursued, and that these old traditions that have been abandoned are coming back.
Absolutely, and I just want to add to that something you said is so important in that to highlight, which is like that it was about deeply exploring that as a part of your practice. I think it's so easy for people to very mistakenly think of improvisation as simply a playground, and it's so much more than that, and that does an incredible disservice to what people are engaging with when they go into improvisatory practices. So as this world of European concert music extended here to the US starts to re-engage with these ideas, I think there's a real urgency to find a depth of that engagement.
Yeah, I have a friend who says that improvisation is anything but anything, and I like that.
Well, on that note, let's thank our guests for giving us all their time.